The California sun blazed down on March Field Air Base in Riverside, turning the tarmac into a shimmering sea of heat. Technical Sergeant Rose Kellerman wiped grease from her hands onto her coveralls and squinted up at the P-38 Lightning that sat in the maintenance hangar. The twin-engine fighter was beautiful, sleek, and deadly, but Rose knew it had a problem that was getting pilots killed. She was 31 years old, the daughter of a crop duster pilot and a school teacher from Iowa. She had grown up with engines, had learned to rebuild a carburetor before she learned to bake a cake. When the war started, she had joined the Women's Army Corps and been assigned to aircraft maintenance. That was 1942. Now, in the spring of 1944, she was one of the most experienced mechanics on the base. But being experienced didn't mean being respected. Kellerman! The shout came from Master Sergeant Frank Donovan, a red-faced man in his 40s who ran the maintenance depot. "What the hell are you doing with that supercharger housing?" Rose looked down at the components she had laid out on her workbench. She had been studying the P-38 supercharger system for weeks, trying to understand why the aircraft struggled at high altitude. "I'm running tests." "Sergeant," she said calmly. Donovan walked over, his boots heavy on the concrete floor. Behind him came two other mechanics, Corporals Miller and Jackson, both of whom were grinning like they were about to watch a show. "Tests," Donovan repeated. "You're running tests on a critical aircraft system without authorization?" "I requested authorization 3 times, Sergeant. You denied it each time." "Because you're a mechanic, not an engineer," Donovan shot back. "Your job is to follow the maintenance manual and fix what's broken, not to redesign aircraft systems." Rose straightened up, meeting his eyes. "The system is broken, Sergeant. Pilots are reporting that the superchargers are failing at altitude. The engines lose power right when they need it most. Men are dying because of it. Men are dying because there's a war on," Donovan said. "Not because of equipment failure. Sergeant, I've documented 15 instances in the past 2 months where P-38 pilots reported supercharger problems during combat. 15 times our fighters couldn't climb fast enough to intercept enemy aircraft or escape trouble." Corporal Miller laughed. "Maybe the pilots just aren't pushing the throttles hard enough." Rose ignored him. "I think I've found the problem. The supercharger impeller is cavitating at high RPM. The design doesn't account for the temperature differential between the compressed air and the ambient temperature at altitude." Donovan stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. "Cavitating? The air isn't flowing smoothly through the supercharger," Rose explained. "It's creating turbulence that reduces efficiency. But I think I can fix it with a simple modification to the intake manifold." "A simple modification," Donovan said slowly. "You want to modify a critical aircraft system based on your theory about airflow." "It's not a theory. It's thermodynamics." "It's insanity," Donovan snapped. "And it's exactly the kind of thing I'd expect from a woman trying to do a man's job. You don't have the technical knowledge or the authority to be tinkering with superchargers." The words stung, but Rose had heard worse. She had endured 2 years of comments about how women didn't understand engines, didn't have the strength for maintenance work, didn't belong in hangars. "Sergeant, give me 1 aircraft in 3 days, she said. "Let me prove it works." "Absolutely not." "Then at least let me brief the engineering team." "Show them my findings." Donovan leaned in close, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Listen to me, Kellerman. You're a decent mechanic when you stick to simple repairs, but you're out of your depth here. If I catch you messing with aircraft systems again without authorization, I'll have you reassigned to laundry duty. Do you understand?" Rose felt anger burning in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "Yes, Sergeant." "Good. Now clean up this mess and get back to work on the scheduled maintenance." As Donovan walked away, Corporals Miller and Jackson lingered. Miller picked up one of her diagrams, a detailed drawing showing her proposed modification. "Cavitating," he said mockingly. "Did you read that in a book, Rosie?" "Put that down," Rose said quietly. "Or what? You going to report me to your boyfriend?" He crumpled the diagram and tossed it on the floor. "Face it, honey. You're in over your head. Why don't you transfer to the motor pool? I hear they need someone to change oil in Jeeps." After they left, Rose stood alone in the hangar, looking at her scattered components and ruined diagram. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to march into Donovan's office and make him listen. But she had learned that anger without evidence was worthless. So instead, she picked up the crumpled diagram, smoothed it out, and kept working. That evening, she sat in the small apartment she shared with two other WAC members, reviewing her calculations by lamplight. Her roommate, Corporal Linda Martinez, looked over her shoulder. "You're still working on that Supercharger thing?" Linda asked. "I have to," Rose said. "Pilots are dying, Linda, and I know how to fix it." "Then why won't they listen?" Rose set down her pencil. "Because I'm a woman. Because I'm enlisted rather than an officer. Because mechanics aren't supposed to have ideas, just wrenches." Linda sat down across from her. "You know what your problem is, Rose? You're right, and they can't stand it. Being right doesn't matter if I can't prove it." "Then prove it." Rose looked at her friend. "Donovan will never give me authorization." "So don't ask for authorization," Linda said. "You work night shift next week, right? You'll be alone in the hangar. No one watching. No one to stop you. You're suggesting I modify an aircraft without permission? I'm suggesting you do what needs to be done," Linda said. "Then when it works, they'll have to admit you were right." Rose thought about it for a long moment. What Linda was suggesting could get her court-martialed, but doing nothing meant more pilots would die because of a problem she could fix. "I'd need help," Rose said slowly. "Someone to cover for me if anyone asks questions?" Linda smiled. "I can do that. And I know two other girls who will help. We're tired of watching men ignore good ideas just because they come from women." Over the next week, Rose prepared carefully. She fabricated the parts she would need in the machine shop, working during her lunch breaks and claiming they were for routine maintenance. She studied the duty roster to identify the night when she would have the most time unsupervised. And she refined her modification until she was certain it would work. The night came on a Tuesday. Rose reported for duty at 8 p.m., signed in with the duty officer, and waited until the base quieted down. By midnight, the hangar was deserted except for her. She had chosen her target carefully, a P-38 that was scheduled for a test flight the next afternoon. The pilot was Captain James Harrison, one of the few officers who had treated her with respect. If anyone would give her modification a fair test, it would be him. Rose worked quickly and precisely. She removed the supercharger housing, modified the intake manifold with the new components she had fabricated, and reassembled everything. The modification was elegant in its simplicity. She had added a series of precisely angled vanes inside the intake that would smooth the airflow and prevent cavitation. The entire modification weighed less than 2 pounds and used parts that cost maybe $5. But if her calculations were correct, it would increase the supercharger's efficiency by 20%. That meant better performance at altitude, faster climb rates, and more power when pilots needed it most. By 4 a.m., she was done. She had tested every connection, verified every specification, and documented everything in her personal notebook. The aircraft looked exactly as it had before, except for her modification hidden inside the supercharger housing. As the sun rose, Rose finished her shift and went to her quarters, exhausted but exhilarated. She had done it. Now she just had to wait to see if it worked. Captain Harrison's test flight was scheduled for 2 p.m. Rose found an excuse to be near the flight line, pretending to work on a nearby aircraft while watching Harrison's P-38. The captain went through his pre-flight checks, climbed into the cockpit, and started the engines. The twin Allison engines roared to life with their distinctive sound. Harrison taxied to the runway, received clearance, and pushed the throttles forward. The P-38 accelerated down the runway and lifted into the air. Rose held her breath, watching as the fighter climbed. This was the critical moment. If her modification worked, Harrison would notice the improved performance immediately. The P-38 continued climbing, its nose pointed steeply upward. Rose could see it ascending faster than normal, the twin engines pulling the aircraft up with authority. Then something happened that made her heart stop. Black smoke suddenly poured from the right engine. The P-38 wavered in the air, losing altitude. Rose felt ice flooding through her veins. Her modification had failed. Worse, it had caused an engine failure. Harrison was in danger, and it was her fault. She watched in horror as the P-38 descended rapidly, smoke still trailing from the right engine. Harrison was trying to reach the runway, nursing the aircraft down in a controlled descent. The fighter touched down hard, bounced, and then settled onto the runway. Fire trucks raced toward it as Harrison shut down the engines and evacuated the cockpit. Within minutes, alarms were sounding across the base. Rose stood frozen, watching the smoke rise from the damaged aircraft, knowing her career was over. Worse, she had nearly killed a pilot. Master Sergeant Donovan's voice boomed across the flight line. "Kellerman, get over here, now!" Rose walked toward him on legs that felt like lead. She could see the fury in his face, could see the MPs gathering near the damaged aircraft. "Did you touch that aircraft?" Donovan demanded. Rose thought about lying, about trying to save herself. But she had never been a liar. "Yes, Sergeant," she said quietly. "I modified the Supercharger system." Donovan's face turned purple. "You did what?" "I made a modification to improve high-altitude performance." You thought? Donovan was shouting now, loud enough that everyone on the flight line could hear. "You modified a combat aircraft without authorization, and you nearly killed a pilot. You're done, Kellerman. Finished!" He grabbed her arm and marched her toward the Provost Marshal's office. Behind them, mechanics were gathering around the damaged P-38, examining the smoking engine. Rose felt numb. She had been so sure she was right, so certain her modification would work. But instead, she had caused exactly the kind of disaster that Donovan had warned against. As they reached the Provost Marshal's office, Captain Harrison appeared, still in his flight suit, his face streaked with soot. "Sergeant Donovan," he called out. "I need to speak with Sergeant Kellerman." "Captain, this woman sabotaged your aircraft. She's being placed under arrest." Harrison walked over, and Rose braced herself for his anger. She deserved it. She had put his life at risk, but when Harrison spoke, his voice was calm. "Sergeant, I need you to release her. Now." "Sir, I know what she did," Harrison interrupted. "And we need to talk about it." "But not with the MPs. In private." Donovan looked between them, confused. Finally, he released Rose's arm. "5 minutes, Captain. Then I'm filing charges." Harrison led Rose away from the Provost Marshal's office to a quiet corner of the flight line. When they were alone, he turned to face her. "Sergeant Kellerman," he said, "what exactly did you do to my aircraft?" Rose stood before Captain Harrison, her whole body trembling. She had prepared herself for anger, for accusations, for the end of her military career. But Harrison's expression wasn't angry. It was curious, intense, like a man trying to solve a puzzle. "Sir, I modified the Supercharger intake manifold," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I added vanes to smooth the airflow and prevent cavitation. I thought it would improve high-altitude performance." "Why would you think that?" Rose pulled her notebook from her pocket. Her hands were shaking as she opened it to show him her calculations. "I've been tracking Supercharger performance data for months, sir. I noticed a pattern. At altitudes above 20,000 feet, the P-38's engines consistently lose power. The Supercharger should compensate, but they're not working efficiently." Harrison studied the notebook, his eyes moving across the rows of numbers and diagrams. "You did all this research on your own?" "Yes, sir. Master Sergeant Donovan wouldn't authorize a formal investigation." "So you took it upon yourself to modify my aircraft without authorization?" Rose closed her eyes. "Yes, sir. I know I was wrong. I nearly got you killed. I accept whatever punishment—" "Sergeant," Harrison interrupted gently. "Look at me." Rose opened her eyes and met his gaze. "The engine failure wasn't caused by your modification," Harrison said. Rose felt the world tilt. "Sir?" The right engine threw a rod. "It was a mechanical failure completely unrelated to the Supercharger system. In fact, before that engine failed, I was experiencing the most incredible performance I've ever gotten from a P-38. He pulled out his own notebook, flipping to a page of hastily scrawled notes. At 15,000 feet, I was climbing at 3,000 feet per minute. That's 40% faster than normal. The engines were running cooler and smoother than I've ever felt. Whatever you did to that Supercharger, Sergeant, it worked." Rose felt tears stinging her eyes. "It worked?" "It worked brilliantly," Harrison said. "Until that damn rod broke, I was flying the best P-38 I've ever been in." He looked toward the damaged aircraft, where mechanics were still swarming around the smoking engine. "We need to examine your modification before Donovan's people tear it apart. Come with me." They walked back to the P-38 together. Master Sergeant Donovan was there directing mechanics to remove the damaged engine. "Captain Harrison," Donovan said, "we're documenting all unauthorized modifications to this aircraft for the court-martial." "There won't be a court-martial, Sergeant," Harrison said firmly. "Sergeant Kellerman's modification is exactly what our P-38s need." Donovan's mouth fell open. "Sir, she sabotaged your aircraft." "She improved my aircraft. The engine failure was unrelated to her work." Harrison turned to the mechanics. "I want the left engine supercharger housing removed carefully. Don't damage anything. I want to see exactly what Sergeant Kellerman did." Over the next hour, they examined Rose's modification. She explained every detail to Harrison and the growing crowd of mechanics and engineers who gathered around. The vanes she had added, the angles she had calculated, the thermodynamic principles that made it work. One of the base engineers, Lieutenant David Chen, listened with increasing amazement. "Sergeant, do you realize what you've done? You've solved a problem that Lockheed's own engineers have been struggling with for a year." "Lockheed knows about the supercharger problem?" Rose asked. "Everyone knows about it," Chen said. "The P-38 is a brilliant aircraft, but its high-altitude performance has always been limited." "You're telling me you fixed it with a $5 modification?" "The parts cost $3.20, Rose said quietly. Chen laughed, a sound of pure delight. $3.20. "And you did this in your spare time, without authorization, because no one would listen to you?" "Yes, sir." Captain Harrison looked at Master Sergeant Donovan. "Sergeant, I want Sergeant Kellerman's modification installed on every P-38 in this squadron. Immediately." Donovan's face was red, but he couldn't argue with a direct order from a pilot. "Yes, sir. But the modification hasn't been tested or approved by—" "I just tested it," Harrison said, "and I'm approving it. Get it done." Word of Rose's modification spread through the base like wildfire. By evening, pilots were coming to the maintenance hangar to see the mechanic who had made their fighters faster. Officers who had never spoken to her before were asking questions, wanting to understand the engineering behind her innovation. But Rose also noticed the hostile stares from some of the male mechanics, saw the resentment in their eyes. She had broken the rules, had shown them up, and some of them would never forgive her for it. That night, Master Sergeant Donovan called her into his office. He sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. "Sit down, Kellerman," he said. Rose sat, waiting for whatever was coming. "What you did was wrong," Donovan said. "You violated regulations, modified an aircraft without authorization, and put a pilot at risk." "Yes, Sergeant, but—" Donovan paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "But you were also right. Your modification works. Captain Harrison is recommending that it be implemented fleet-wide." He pulled out a folder and pushed it across the desk. "The base commander wants to know everything about your modification. How you developed it, how it works, how it can be manufactured and installed on other aircraft. You're being temporarily reassigned to the engineering section to document your work." Rose looked at the folder, hardly believing what she was hearing. "Sergeant, I'm not an engineer. I'm a mechanic." "Then I guess you're getting a promotion," Donovan said. His tone was grudging, but there was something else there, too. "Respect, maybe, or at least recognition. The Army doesn't care about your gender or your rank when you create something that saves pilots' lives. They care about results." Over the next 2 weeks, Rose worked with Lieutenant Chen and his engineering team to document her modification. They tested it exhaustively, putting it through every scenario they could imagine. Every test confirmed what Captain Harrison had experienced. The modification increased supercharger efficiency by an average of 22%, improved climb rates by 40%, and reduced engine temperatures at high altitude. The Army Air Force ordered the modification to be installed on every P-38 in the fleet. Rose's $3 innovation was going to be used on thousands of aircraft. But as the modification was being implemented, something else was happening. A report was being written for Army Air Force headquarters, documenting the development of what was being called the Kellerman Supercharger enhancement. And the officer writing that report was not Lieutenant Chen or Captain Harrison. It was Major William Bradford, the base engineering officer, a man Rose had met exactly twice, both times in the past week. Rose learned about this when she was called to Major Bradford's office. He was a tall, silver-haired man in his 50s, with the kind of commanding presence that came from years of military service. "Sergeant Kellerman," he said warmly, "please sit down. I wanted to talk to you about the report I'm submitting to headquarters." Rose sat, feeling uneasy. Bradford opened a folder on his desk. "I've documented the development of the Supercharger modification, the testing process, and the results. It's quite an achievement. Thank you, sir. However, I do have a concern." Bradford leaned forward, his expression sympathetic. "As it stands, the report describes you as the sole developer of this modification. That creates some problems." "Problems, sir?" "Political problems," Bradford said. "You're an enlisted woman working in maintenance. If headquarters sees that an enlisted mechanic developed a major aircraft modification without authorization or oversight, it raises questions about our engineering and safety protocols." Rose felt her stomach sinking. "I see. But if the report shows that you developed this modification under the guidance and supervision of the engineering team, with proper authorization and oversight, then everyone wins. You get credit for your innovation, and the base doesn't look like it has inadequate controls." "But that's not what happened," Rose said quietly. "It's close enough to what happened," Bradford countered. "After all, Lieutenant Chen did review your work. I did approve the testing. The engineering team did validate your results. After I had already done the work. After I had already proven it worked." Bradford's expression hardened slightly. "Sergeant, I'm trying to help you. Do you understand what will happen if headquarters sees that you violated regulations? They might implement your modification, but they'll also make an example of you. Courts-martial for unauthorized aircraft modifications. Dishonorable discharge." Rose looked at him, understanding finally clicking into place. "You want to change the report to protect yourself, not me." "I want to change the report to protect both of us," Bradford said, "and to ensure that your modification gets implemented as quickly as possible. If there's a scandal around how it was developed, the bureaucrats in Washington might delay deployment. Pilots could die while they investigate." It was a clever argument. Rose could almost believe Bradford cared about the pilots rather than his own reputation. "What exactly do you want to change?" she asked. Bradford pulled out a typewritten document. "I've drafted a revised version. It describes how the engineering team, under my supervision, identified the supercharger efficiency problem. You're credited as a talented mechanic who assisted with fabrication and installation." Rose read through the document. It wasn't a complete lie, but it transformed her from the innovator to a supporting player. Her calculations, her research, her months of work, all of it attributed to the engineering team. "And if I refuse to sign this?" Rose asked. "Then I'll submit the original report and let headquarters decide what to do with you," Bradford said. "I suspect it won't end well." Rose thought about Captain Harrison, about the pilots who would benefit from her modification. She thought about the war, about the Japanese fighters that American pilots would face. Her modification could save lives. Did it matter who got credit? "I need time to think about it," she said. Bradford's expression showed annoyance, but he nodded. "You have 24 hours. Then I'm submitting the report with or without your cooperation." Rose left his office feeling sick. She had finally proven herself, had finally created something valuable, and now it was being taken away from her. That evening, she met with Captain Harrison and Lieutenant Chen in a quiet corner of the officers' club. She told them about Bradford's demand. Harrison's face darkened with anger. "That son of a bitch is trying to steal your work. He's trying to cover his own ass," Chen said. "If headquarters finds out that a major innovation came from an unauthorized modification by an enlisted mechanic, it makes Bradford's entire engineering section look incompetent." "Can you stop him?" Rose asked. Harrison and Chen exchanged glances. "He's the base engineering officer," Harrison said slowly. "He outranks both of us. And technically, he has the authority to write the report however he wants. So I just have to accept it?" "No," Chen said firmly. "We document everything. We make sure the truth is recorded, even if Bradford buries it in his official report." Over the next day, they worked together to create a complete record of Rose's innovation. Chen helped her write a detailed technical paper describing her research and development process. Harrison submitted a pilot's report praising her work and explicitly crediting her as the sole developer. They gathered statements from the mechanics who had witnessed her working on the modification. When Rose returned to Bradford's office the next day, she brought copies of all this documentation. "I'll sign your version of the report," she told Bradford. "But I'm also submitting my own technical paper to the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. And Captain Harrison is sending his pilot report directly to the Air Force Chief of Staff." Bradford's face went white. "You can't do that." "I just did, sir." "Your report will go to headquarters describing how your engineering team developed the modification. My paper will go to the engineering community describing how I actually did it. Let history decide which version to believe." Bradford stood, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. "You're making a very big mistake, Sergeant." "Maybe," Rose said. "But it's my mistake to make." She signed his revised report and left his office. She had no idea if her technical paper would be published, if anyone would care about her version of events. But she had told the truth, and that was all she could do. 3 weeks later, Rose received orders transferring her to Wright Field in Ohio. Wright Field was the Army Air Force's primary research and development facility, where new aircraft and technologies were tested and evaluated. The transfer came without explanation. Rose packed her belongings, said goodbye to Linda and her other friends, and boarded a train heading east. As California disappeared behind her, she wondered if this was Bradford's revenge, shuffling her off to some remote corner where she couldn't cause trouble. She arrived at Wright Field on a cold November morning. The base was enormous, sprawling across thousands of acres, filled with hangars, laboratories, and test facilities. Rose reported to the engineering headquarters, uncertain what to expect. Instead of a minor assignment, she was met by Colonel Robert Wilson, the chief of the power plant laboratory. He was a distinguished engineer in his 60s with kind eyes and a reputation for brilliance. "Sergeant Kellerman," he said, shaking her hand warmly. "Welcome to Wright Field. We've been eager to meet you." "Sir?" Wilson led her into his office where her technical paper was spread across his desk. "Your paper on supercharger cavitation and flow optimization was published in last month's ASME journal. It's causing quite a stir in the engineering community." Rose felt a surge of emotion. "It was published?" "Published and praised," Wilson said. "You identified a problem that's been plaguing high-altitude aircraft for years, and you developed an elegant solution using basic thermodynamic principles. It's brilliant work, Sergeant." He gestured for her to sit. "I also received Captain Harrison's pilot report and Lieutenant Chen's technical evaluation. Between those documents and your published paper, it's very clear who actually developed the Kellerman Supercharger enhancement. Regardless of what Major Bradford's official report claimed." Rose felt tears welling up. Someone believed her. Someone understood. "I want you to work here," Wilson said. "In this laboratory, we develop power plant innovations for current and future aircraft. You have exactly the kind of creative thinking we need. I'm recommending you for officer candidate school and assignment to my engineering team." "Sir, I'm not a college graduate. I don't have formal engineering training." "You have something better," Wilson said. "You have intuition, practical experience, and the ability to see problems that others miss. We can teach you the formal theory. We can't teach innovation." Over the next 6 months, Rose attended OCS and earned her commission as a second lieutenant. She returned to Wright Field and began working on the next generation of aircraft power plants. She helped develop improved fuel injection systems, better cooling solutions, and more efficient turbines. But she never forgot where she had come from, or the mechanics who had believed in her when officers wouldn't. Meanwhile, her supercharger modification was being installed on P-38s across the world. In the Pacific, American fighter pilots found themselves able to climb faster and fight at higher altitudes. They could intercept Japanese bombers before they reached American bases. They could escape trouble when outnumbered. The modification that had started in a California hangar at midnight was saving lives in the skies over the Philippines, Okinawa, and eventually Japan itself. Rose heard stories about the modification's success through pilot reports and after-action reviews. But she also heard something else. In the official histories being written about the P-38's development, Major Bradford's version of events was becoming the accepted narrative. The engineering team had identified the problem, developed the solution, tested it carefully. An enlisted mechanic had assisted with fabrication. Rose was being written out of her own story. In early 1945, Rose received an invitation that surprised her. The Society of Women Engineers was hosting a conference in New York City, and they wanted her to speak about her experiences developing aircraft innovations. Colonel Wilson encouraged her to accept. "The world needs to hear your story, Rose. Not the sanitized version in Bradford's report, but the truth." Rose traveled to New York, nervous about speaking to a large audience. The conference was held at Columbia University, and the auditorium was packed with female engineers, scientists, and students. When Rose walked to the podium, she looked out at hundreds of faces, all watching her with interest and hope. These were women who had faced the same dismissals, the same mockery, the same barriers that she had overcome. She told them everything. The months of research that no one would approve. The midnight modification of an aircraft without authorization. The engine failure that nearly ended her career. Captain Harrison's support. Major Bradford's attempt to steal credit. "I learned something important," Rose said. "You can't wait for permission to prove you're right. Sometimes you have to take a risk, break the rules, and let the results speak for themselves." The audience erupted in applause. After her speech, women lined up to talk to her, to share their own stories of being underestimated and overlooked. One young woman, a college student studying mechanical engineering, asked, "How did you deal with the anger? With knowing that someone took credit for your work?" Rose thought carefully before answering. "I stopped caring about credit and started caring about impact. My modification is saving pilots' lives. That matters more than my name in a report." But even as she said it, Rose knew it wasn't entirely true. It did matter. Recognition mattered. Truth mattered. The war ended in August 1945. Rose was at Wright Field when the news came through, watching as people celebrated in the streets. She thought about all the pilots who had flown P-38s with her modification, wondered how many of them had survived because they could climb just a little faster, fight at just a little higher altitude. After the war, the Army Air Force began a comprehensive review of wartime innovations. They were documenting the technologies that had helped win the war, preparing historical records and recommendations for the future. A team of historians came to Wright Field to interview engineers about their contributions. When they reached Rose, they had Major Bradford's report in hand. "Lieutenant Kellerman," the lead historian said, "can you tell us about your role in assisting with the development of the P-38 Supercharger enhancement?" Rose looked at the report, at Bradford's carefully constructed lie, and made a decision. "That report is inaccurate," she said flatly. "I didn't assist with the development. I was the sole developer." She spent the next 3 hours telling them the complete story, providing documentation, giving them names of witnesses. The historians listened with increasing interest and concern. "Lieutenant, why didn't you challenge Major Bradford's report when it was first filed?" one of them asked. "Because I was an enlisted mechanic going up against a major," Rose said. "Because I'd already violated regulations by doing unauthorized modifications. Because Bradford threatened me with a court-martial if I didn't cooperate." The historians took detailed notes. One of them, a former professor named Dr. Richard Anderson, seemed particularly troubled. "This isn't the first time we've encountered this pattern," he said. "Women and enlisted personnel making contributions that officers later claimed credit for. But your case is one of the most blatant." "Can you correct the record?" Rose asked. "We can try," Anderson said. "But the official report has already been distributed. Changing it now would require admitting that a major lied in an official document. The Army doesn't like to admit mistakes." Rose felt the familiar disappointment settling over her. Even now, with the war over and the truth documented, institutional inertia protected the lie. But Dr. Anderson had one more question. "Lieutenant, what are your plans now that the war is over?" "I'm staying in," Rose said. "The Air Force is becoming a separate branch, and Colonel Wilson wants me to continue working on jet engine development." Anderson smiled. "Then you'll have plenty of opportunities to create more innovations. And I promise you this, I'm writing a comprehensive history of wartime aviation technology. Your story will be in it." told accurately and completely. Over the next 5 years, Rose continued her work at Wright Field, which became Wright-Patterson Air Force Base after the Air Force became independent. She helped develop the engines for the next generation of fighters and bombers. She earned a master's degree in mechanical engineering through night school. She was promoted to captain, then major, and slowly, carefully, the truth about the Supercharger modification began to emerge. Dr. Anderson's history was published in 1952. It included a full chapter on the Kellerman Supercharger enhancement, telling the story exactly as it had happened. The book became required reading at the Air Force Academy. Other historians began investigating, finding the documentation that Rose and her allies had preserved. Technical journals published retrospective analyses of her innovation, crediting her properly. Most importantly, the pilots remembered. The men who had flown P-38s with her modification, who had survived combat because they could climb faster, they knew who had saved their lives. In 1958, Rose received a letter from a retired Air Force colonel named James Harrison. He had been promoted after the war and had served with distinction before retiring. "Dear Major Kellerman," he wrote, "I'm writing to inform you that I've been invited to speak at the Air Force Association's annual conference about innovations in fighter aircraft. I intend to tell the story of the day I flew a P-38 with your Supercharger modification and how that experience changed my life and the lives of countless other pilots. I wanted you to know that your contribution hasn't been forgotten by those who mattered most, the men who flew the planes you improved." Rose kept that letter in her desk drawer for the rest of her career. Whenever she felt discouraged or overlooked, she would read it and remember why she did this work. Major Bradford, meanwhile, had retired shortly after the war ended. His official report remained in the files, but as more accurate histories were published, fewer people believed it. Rose retired from the Air Force in 1968 as a full colonel after 26 years of service. She had worked on jet engines, rocket propulsion, and advanced materials. She held 3 patents and had published dozens of technical papers. At her retirement ceremony, the commanding general of the Air Force Systems Command spoke about her career. "Colonel Kellerman has spent her life proving that innovation comes not from rank or gender, but from curiosity, determination, and the courage to challenge conventional thinking." But the moment Rose treasured most came after the ceremony, when a young female engineer approached her. She was a lieutenant, fresh out of the academy, assigned to propulsion research. "Ma'am," she said nervously, "I just wanted to thank you. At the academy, they taught us about the Kellerman Supercharger enhancement, how you developed it despite being told you weren't qualified, how you persisted even when people tried to take credit. That story is why I joined the Air Force. You showed us that we belong here." Rose looked at this young woman, saw the determination in her eyes, and felt something click into place. Maybe individual recognition didn't matter as much as she had thought. Maybe what mattered was opening doors for others, proving that women could innovate and lead. "What's your name, Lieutenant?" Rose asked. "Patterson, ma'am. Lieutenant Sarah Patterson." "Well, Lieutenant Patterson, let me tell you something. The Academy taught you the successful version of my story. But there's more to it than that. I broke rules, I nearly got court-martialed, and I watched men take credit for my work. Success wasn't clean or easy." The young lieutenant's face fell slightly. "So what should I do when that happens to me?" Rose smiled. "Document everything. Find allies who believe in truth over politics. And most importantly, keep innovating. Because eventually the truth comes out. It might take years, it might take decades. But if your work saves lives and changes how we fight wars, people will figure out who really did it." Rose lived to see the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II. By then, her story had been told in books, documentaries, and Air Force training materials. The Supercharger modification she had developed in secret, risking her career on a midnight gamble, was recognized as one of the significant innovations of the war. In 1995, the Air Force named a new engineering laboratory at Wright-Patterson in her honor, the Colonel Rose Kellerman Propulsion Innovation Center. At the dedication ceremony, she was 92 years old, small and frail but still sharp as ever. The commanding general unveiled a plaque that read, "Named for Colonel Rose Kellerman, whose innovative Supercharger modification in 1944 demonstrated that breakthrough solutions often come from unexpected sources. Her courage in challenging conventional wisdom and her persistence in the face of institutional resistance exemplify the innovative spirit that drives Air Force engineering. Excellence. Rose stood before that plaque, surrounded by current and former engineers, pilots, and officers, and thought about the long journey from that midnight modification to this moment. A reporter asked her what she felt, looking back on her career and her struggle for recognition. "I feel grateful," Rose said. "Grateful that I was given the opportunity to serve, even when it was hard. Grateful for the allies who supported me, and grateful that the pilots who flew those modified P-38s came home to their families." "Do you feel you got the recognition you deserved?" the reporter pressed. Rose thought about Major Bradford's false report, about the years when her contribution was minimized or ignored. Then she thought about the young engineers who had told her she inspired them, about the technical papers that cited her work, about the innovation center that bore her name. "I got something better than recognition," she said finally. "I got to see the impact of my work. I got to know that something I created made a difference. And I got to open doors for the women who came after me. That's more valuable than any medal or mention in a report." But there was one more twist to come. In 2003, 8 years after Rose's death, a researcher at the National Archives discovered a cache of documents that had been misfiled for decades. Among them was a handwritten letter from 1945, from the Army Air Force Chief of Staff to the Secretary of War. The letter recommended that Technical Sergeant Rose Kellerman be awarded the Legion of Merit for her development of the Supercharger modification. The recommendation had been submitted by Captain Harrison and endorsed by multiple senior officers, but the award had never been processed. Somehow the recommendation had been lost in the bureaucratic shuffle of the end of the war. The Air Force, embarrassed by the oversight, announced that they would posthumously award Colonel Rose Kellerman the Legion of Merit. The ceremony was held at the Kellerman Innovation Center, attended by her surviving family and dozens of engineers who had been inspired by her story. Among the attendees was an 80-year-old woman named Sarah Patterson, now a retired Major General, who had spent her career in Air Force engineering. "Rose Kellerman told me something when I was a brand-new lieutenant," Patterson said at the ceremony. "She said that the truth eventually comes out." She was right. It took 60 years, but the Air Force has finally acknowledged what those of us who knew her always understood. She was a genius who changed the war and refused to let anyone erase her contribution. The medal was presented to Rose's niece, who accepted it with tears in her eyes. "My aunt never complained about being overlooked," she said. "She just kept working, kept innovating, kept proving that women could do anything men could do and often do it better. This medal is wonderful, but the real tribute to her is every woman who has served in the Air Force since. She made it possible for all of them." Today, the story of Rose Kellerman is taught at the Air Force Academy as a lesson in both engineering innovation and the importance of giving credit where it's due. Her Supercharger modification is studied in aerospace engineering courses, and the innovation center that bears her name continues to develop the propulsion systems that keep America's aircraft superior. The young mechanics and engineers who work there, many of them women, pass by her portrait every day. In the painting, Rose is wearing her coveralls, holding a wrench, standing in front of a P-38 Lightning. And if you look closely at the bottom of the painting, you can see the inscription that Rose herself requested. "Innovation doesn't require permission. It requires courage."